If you're living in Australia, then you may probably read the history of Australia for World War II, and you may picture soldiers, ships, and distant battle lines. Yet far above the Pacific, another struggle lived every hour of every day as Australian pilots climbed into fragile aircraft knowing heat, storms, and endless water showed no mercy. And these aircrafts were never as symbols or decorations. They were lifelines that guarded coastal cities, chased enemy bombers, carried wounded men home, and sometimes vanished without a trace, leaving only silence behind. So let's check all about these beasts with us. CIC Boomerang. You know what always hits me about the boomerang? It wasn't born from confidence. It came from fear. In 1942, with Japan pushing south and imported fighters slow to arrive, Australia rushed to build its own answer. The result was a compact, tough little aircraft designed and constructed domestically, flying for the first time in May 1942 before being thrown into real combat in 1943. Armed with machine guns and rockets, it never pretended to be faster than a Zero, and pilots knew that. That small payload and its hurried development from the earlier WWII made some crews uneasy. But once it reached New Guinea and Northern Australia, the Boomerang found its place. It thrived in ground support, close escort, and point defense, taking punishment and staying in the air. Over time, its ruggedness earned trust, and variants like the CA-12, CA-13, CA-14, and CA-19 kept it flying right through to the end of the war. Consolidated PBY Catalina. The Catalina feels less like an aircraft and more like a long, and has lonely story. Australia ordered its first in 1940. By the time the Pacific War exploded, these flying boats became a lifeline. From 1942 onward, up to 168 Catalinas were in Australian service, drifting across enormous stretches of ocean on missions that tested both engines and nerves. They were slow, painfully so, and that made them vulnerable, but endurance was their secret weapon. That same endurance carried them into mine-laying runs through Japanese shipping lanes, quiet, dangerous work done at night. It also made possible the eerie double sunrise flights, secret mail runs lasting over 30 hours non-stop. Some even carried folding kayaks, dropped for reconnaissance and commando operations among scattered islands, search and rescue, patrol, sabotage, and silence followed wherever the Catalina went, often far from any help at all. Curtiss P-40 Kitty Hawk. You just talk to anyone who studies Australia's air war, and the Kitty Hawk always comes up, because for a long stretch, this was the aircraft holding the line. The RAF flew the P-40 heavily throughout the Pacific Campaign, and in 1942, at places like Milne Bay and Port Moresby, it helped stall the Japanese advance when the situation felt painfully fragile. Australians ordered hundreds of Kitty Hawks, operating multiple versions, E, K, M, and N models, and they were flown hard in heat that punished both machines and men. The Kitty Hawk wasn't glamorous, but it was rugged and reliable, and that mattered when enemy fire shredded airframes and long flights stretched engines to their limits. Many pilots owed their survival to that toughness. Figures like Clive "Killer" Caldwell turned the aircraft into legend. Even after the war, the Kitty Hawk refused to disappear, remaining in Australian service until 1947. Bristol Beaufort. The Beaufort carries one of the heavier ghosts of Australia's air war. From the early years of WWII, these twin-engine torpedo bombers, many built in Australia under license, were sent into roles that offered little margin for error. Beaufort crews flew anti-shipping strikes, long patrols, and night raids, skimming hostile waters where a single mistake meant disappearance. Their work stretched across Papua New Guinea and surrounding islands, regions that swallowed aircraft without witnesses. Several Beauforts simply never came home. Families waited decades without answers, only names on paper and empty photographs. Then, in 2025, the wreckage of Beaufort A9211 was finally located. After 82 years, its discovery offered a form of closure that had seemed impossible. That recovery didn't change what happened, but it reminded people that these aircraft weren't just hardware. They were final rooms where young crews spent their last moments, far from anyone who loved them. WWII. The WWII's story always feels slightly unfair. Built locally from 1939, it was meant to be a trainer and general-purpose aircraft, something to prepare pilots, not bury them. But shortages don't care about intentions. When war pressed closer, WWIIs were thrown into combat early, and pilots learned quickly that this aircraft couldn't dogfight true fighters. The sky was not forgiving about that lesson. Still, the WWII refused to be useless. It shifted into what it could do: reconnaissance, Army cooperation, and even ground attack missions across Pacific theaters. Its simple design made it widespread and easy to operate, which is exactly why it ended up everywhere. That same simplicity, though, exposed its weaknesses whenever enemy fighters appeared. The WWII became a symbol of improvisation, an aircraft that lived between what Australia wanted and what Australia actually had, carrying crews into danger long before it was ever built for it. Vultee Vengeance. You can almost feel the hesitation around the Vengeance when it first reached Australia. Crews had to work them up, learn their limits, and shape them into something usable before they were judged ready for combat. Once that moment came, the aircraft finally revealed its purpose. The Vengeance was built for steep, punishing dive attacks. And when it rolled over and dropped toward entrenched Japanese positions, the accuracy could be devastating. Those precision strikes carved into jungle defenses and hardened ground targets where other methods struggled. But timing is everything in war. Ordered in large numbers in late 1941, these dive bombers didn't actually begin arriving until 1943, and even then, they weren't rushed straight into the sky. By the time many Vengeances were truly ready, strategies had shifted. Faster and more flexible aircraft were taking priority, and entire squadrons found themselves operating a machine that history was already preparing to replace. Some fought hard. Many barely had time. Bristol Beaufighter. Imagine something big, low, and angry sliding over the water, not hunting for a duel, not circling for glory, but coming directly in to tear a hole through whatever sat ahead. That's how the Beaufighter earned its reputation in Australian hands. When No. 30 Squadron was formed in 1942, it wasn't trained to dance in the sky. It was pushed into ground attack and anti-shipping work from New Guinea, later following the war north into the Netherlands East Indies. The aircraft's menace came from mass, not speed. 4 20mm cannons, backed by heavy machine guns, then rockets or torpedoes, depending on the mission, turned each run into controlled destruction. Fired at wave height, the impact was immediate and brutal. Japanese troops in New Guinea gave it the name Whispering Death. Beaufighters didn't circle wreckage, they left it behind. Supermarine Spitfire. Amica Virate. Most people hear Spitfire, and their mind flies to Europe. But Northern Australia tells a different story. Over Darwin, the Spitfire became a defender, not a symbol. Naturzut. Wing Ryaf took on the job of shielding the city from Japanese raids, climbing fast to meet attackers coming in over the empty ocean. Structurally, these weren't fragile machines. The MK-8 carried all-metal semi-monocoque construction, cantilever wings, and retractable landing gear, a hard-built aircraft meant to survive punishment. Yet one weakness haunted every sortie: limited fuel. That single factor meant less time in the air and fewer options when flights drifted too far from base. Even after raids slowed in late 1943, the pressure didn't lift. Combat thinned, tension stayed, and morale problems spread through the wing as crews remained on edge without the release of constant action. De Havilland Mosquito. There's something almost unsettling about the Mosquito when you learn what it was made of. A frontline combat aircraft built mostly from wood, flying into Pacific humidity as if rot were a rumor. Crews called it the Wooden Wonder, and in August 1945, Mosquitoes of No. 1 Squadron RAF were operating out of Labuan, Borneo, striking targets late in the war. What people don't picture are the ground crews. In that tropical heat, they swarmed over every airframe daily, fighting an environment that seemed determined to eat the aircraft alive. These were not showpieces. They were fast, precise tools used for strikes and interdiction, demanding constant attention just to stay trustworthy. Every mission balanced performance against decay. The Mosquito's real battle wasn't only in the air. It was against moisture, insects, swelling wood, and time itself. Consolidated B-24 Liberator. When the Liberator finally arrived in full force, it changed what Australia could reach. From mid-1944, the RAF gained its first heavy bomber arm that was entirely its own. 7 squadrons and 2 special duty flights flew the B-24, creating the country's first fully Australian-operated long-range bomber force. The structure came quickly. No. 82 Wing, formed in August 1944, became operational on January 11, 1945, and soon its aircraft were pushing north, striking shipping and land targets across the Dutch East Indies, Celebes, and Borneo. These missions stretched deep over the water and jungle. And there was a darker truth that crews lived with. Ditching a Liberator at sea was especially dangerous. The fuselage could break in two on impact, meaning even a survivable escape from flak could turn fatal in seconds. Survival didn't always end the fight. Lockheed Hudson. There's a reason the Hudson never gets talked about loudly, because it comes with a warning. When No. 32 Squadron formed at Port Moresby on 21 February 1942, Hudsons were already waiting, and they went straight into the grind of anti-shipping strikes, anti-submarine patrols, bombing runs, and reconnaissance across the New Guinea campaign. Long before that, individual airframes were already living complicated lives. Hudson A-16-112, built in 1939, and received by the RAF on 5 December 1941, moved from East Coast anti-sub patrols to frontline work at Milne Bay, where it spent about a year flying bombing, armed reconnaissance, and patrol missions. These aircraft were often what stood between Australia and unseen threats. One Hudson crew even fought so fiercely against multiple Zeros that Japanese ace Saburo Sakai later praised them. A rare acknowledgement born out of respect, earned in a sky that usually offered none. Douglas Boston, A-20. If the Pacific Air War had a street fighter, it was the Boston. The RAF used that name for its A-20 family, and from September 1942, No. 22 Squadron began pushing them into some of the most dangerous work in the region. They hit targets in the East Indies, tore into Japanese positions, and played a major role during the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, where convoys were hunted relentlessly. The Boston made sense out here because it could go low and fast, slam a target, and disappear before defenses fully woke up. That same approach meant crews lived where flak felt personal, rising from the sea and jungle straight into their paths. And sometimes danger didn't even wait for takeoff. In November 1944, a Japanese raid on WWII destroyed 13 Bostons on the ground, wiping out aircraft before their crews ever had a chance to climb inside. Some Pacific losses began in silence. Vought OS2U Kingfisher. The Kingfisher always feels like it wandered into the wrong war. A small float plane, lightly armed, slow, and never meant to intimidate. Yet after the Netherlands East Indies fell in 1942, several were diverted to Australia, and 18 Kingfishers eventually joined No. 107 Squadron RAF. From Rathmines on the New South Wales coast, they spent years flying anti-submarine and coastal patrols, work that lasted right through 1945. Scanning a wide ocean with limited speed and protection placed crews under constant strain. Many flights ended with nothing more dramatic than a distant wake or a shadow that might have been a periscope. That uncertainty became its own pressure. Beyond patrols, Kingfishers also supported search and rescue operations linked to elements of the British Pacific Fleet moving along Australia's east coast. They didn't dominate the skies. They watched them, quietly, for anyone who failed to come back. Avro Anson. The Anson started life as a trainer, something steady and forgiving. But when conflict spread across the sea, the RAF reshaped its purpose. By war's end, Australia had operated over 1,000 Ansons, using them not only for training, but also for coastal reconnaissance, communications, and light patrol work. Out over New Guinea and along the eastern seaboard, these aircraft took on anti-submarine and shipping patrols, flying long, uneventful hours that rarely made headlines yet protected vital routes. Early in the war, the theater simply lacked heavier, purpose-built reconnaissance aircraft, so basic trainers were pushed into surveillance roles. That irony followed every sortie. Crews often returned with stories of endless water, thin clouds, and occasional radar flickers that might mean danger or might mean nothing. The Anson's battlefield was patience, and its victories were measured in what never happened. Airspeed Oxford. The Oxford's war never appeared in photographs of dogfights or burning ships. It unfolded in hangars, classrooms, and long practice flights that prepared others for what waited beyond the coast. In RAF service, the Airspeed Oxford became a trainer first, shaping pilots, navigators, and aircrew. But it also took on liaison duties, light transport, and navigation exercises tied directly to Pacific operations. Its steady twin-engine reliability turned it into a quiet backbone, the aircraft thousands trusted before ever stepping into Beauforts, Kitty Hawks, or Liberators. Without it, frontline squadrons would have been thinner, less prepared, and far more fragile. There's a shadow that follows that role. Some who trained in Oxford later became the only crewmen in their squadron lost on the very missions they had rehearsed. The Pacific skies still echo with stories like these, carried by metal, wood, and the people who climbed inside. If this journey gives you something, then don't forget to tap like, share it with someone who loves history, and subscribe for more forgotten war stories. Thanks for being with us up here, and we'll see you again very soon.